This morning, the Supreme Court declared once and for all that Nicola Sturgeon's dreams of holding a second independence referendum in Scotland next year are dead in the water. That is, my friends, unless, and only unless, Westminster gives them permission to put the issue to the vote again. As far as Nicola Sturgeon is concerned, this symbolises the death of a happily united kingdom too.
A so-called partnership in which one partner is denied the right to choose a different future, or even to ask itself the question, cannot be described in any way as voluntary or even a partnership at all. So this ruling confirms that the notion of the UK as a voluntary partnership of nations, if it ever was a reality, is no longer a reality.
I'm joined now by the man who started this whole thing, however long ago it was, former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on Jeremy Kyle Live. Alex, I'm as straight as you are, pal. It's the final nail in the coffin for Indy Ref 2, isn't it? Just put up and shut up now, it's done.
I don't think so, Jeremy. I mean, first of all, I think, I don't know about the Supreme Court, but I think it was supremely stupid to go there, the Scottish Government. I mean, in my view, the Supreme Court's a wholly establishment body. It's there. The Supreme Court of the United Kingdom will always defend the United Kingdom, just like the BBC will always defend Britain. They think that's their mission. So I think it was a daft to take the case. But the way things are working out, I mean, it's like the law of unintended consequences, because not content with turning down the Scottish Government's case for a referendum, Lord Reid and his colleagues went on to opine and seemed to suggest that Scotland didn't have the right of self-determination, wasn't really a nation. And there's no surer way to get Scotland's backs up. I mean, I've just come from one of the 20 demonstrations around Scotland tonight. I mean, there's an old saying, you shouldn't sit in a thistle. I think the Supreme Court and probably the Prime Minister have just sat in a thistle, and I think they're going to find it very uncomfortable.
Let's talk about Nicola Sturgeon, though, before we talk about Rishi Sunak and the British government. You implied there that she's gone about this the wrong way, that it's some sort of political gamble going to the Supreme Court. She has absolutely nailed her entire political career on this happening. And surely it is the end of the road for Nicola Sturgeon as well, isn't it?
Well, it depends what the reaction in Scotland is. I mean, it's not wisdom after the event. I've been attacking going to the Supreme Court for some time. I mean, if you're going to end up in court, then you should pass your legislation first and allow it to be challenged. You're in a much stronger position if you have a democratic vote in a parliament behind you. But as I say, the way things are turning out, it seems to have excited Scottish opinion. But, of course, now is going to be the test. I mean, you have to respond to that. You can't just say, well, we don't like it, we're going to moan about it. You're going to say what you're going to do. And, saying we'll have an SNP conference next year sometime is not really up. I mean, I think what should happen is next week, not next year. The Scottish MPs and MSPs who believe in independence should meet together. That's the vast majority in both parliaments, incidentally. And they should have a declaration of Edinburgh. They should say Scotland is a nation. That nation has the right of self-determination, and see how the Supreme Court
Alex,
or Prime Minister Sunak likes that.
Alex, with respect, I'm going to be like a dog with a bone. You're
almost like Nicola... a dog with a bone. There's nothing new there, Jeremy.
Yeah, all right now. Now, man, listen. Nicola Sturgeon said, and I quote, I want to respect democracy. Westminster, whatever it thought, respected the result of the Brexit referendum. Even Liz Truss, who voted Remain, right? She supported it. What I don't understand is why the SNP cannot respect the result of the 2014 referendum. How many does she want? 73 of them. It's not going to happen, is it?
Well, I mean, democracy doesn't stand still, Jeremy. I mean, there's been 4 elections in Scotland since 2014 where the SNP and other parties have put forward an independence platform for a referendum, and there's been a majority on each occasion, and particularly the last 2 since Brexit, where there have been convincing majorities. And it's up to the Scottish people as a nation to decide when there should be another referendum, not to the Supreme Court,
how many,
not
Alex
to the Prime Minister,
do you think there should
not
be
even to
before
Nicola
you...
Sturgeon. It's up
how
to the
many
Scottish
should there
people.
be before you accept what the Scottish people are saying? Because in 2014,
right,
they said no.
Well, OK, let's put it this way. I mean, the Brexit referendum wasn't the first referendum in Europe, Jeremy. There was one back in 1975. Let's paint you a scenario. Let's say you had some courageous Liberal Democrats. Now, I realise that's an oxymoron. And they had the courage of their convictions and actually came out as being pro-Europe and won a landslide victory at the coming election. Now, I know this is an unlikely scenario, but just let's say that happened. then they would have the right, if they so wish, to have another referendum in the UK. You couldn't gainsay that if they won a majority. Well, similarly, if there's a majority in the Scottish Parliament that says we should have another go at it, then Scotland as a nation has a right to decide, because a nation has the right to change its mind.
But here, presumably, and you're an expert and I'm not, OK? So forgive me. But Nicola Sturgeon's SNP weren't elected solely on one issue, the SNP's desire, her desire to have another referendum. I would imagine that Nicola Sturgeon would do better if she looked at the problems at the moment in Scotland across the whole of the United Kingdom. Are you honestly telling me, in your heart of hearts, if there's another referendum somehow, you think the Scottish people will vote to leave? Because I don't. Not in a million years, pal.
Well, I think you're wrong about that. I mean, the polls are 50-50, you know, they're eaksy-peaksy. There's been 30 polls in the last 2 years showing a majority for independence. There's been 38 which show there's been 8 tied, and the last one showed a 7-point lead for independence, incidentally. So the polls, let's say they're half and half. But remember, when I embarked on the referendum campaign back in 2012, support for independence was at 30%. And during the campaign period, it rose to 45%. Not a majority, but a significant rise. I've got little doubt that if there were a referendum, and that's probably why the Westminster government doesn't want one, then Scotland would vote this time to be independent. And you're quite right. I mean, look, the Scottish government's getting criticised. But you said that last time, Alex
Salmond. So did Nicola Sturgeon. Here's the thing I want to say to you, right?
Well, I mean, listen, you can't deny the fact.
I talked to you about the rest of Scotland's problems. The NHS directors up in Scotland are saying that so bad is the NHS that they think it should be propped up by the most wealthy. Wouldn't Nicola Sturgeon do her people more good by concentrating on what's going on instead of chasing the impossible dream that's not going to happen? Or maybe the SNP need to get rid of her and concentrate on the people of Scotland.
Well, it's possible to do both things. I mean, nobody, not even my worst enemy in 2014, denied that the Scottish government were good on the job or good at running the shop. That was a given in 2014. Times are tougher now. And the Scottish government has come in for sustained criticism, much of it justified. However, you've got to compare the two things. I mean, when people look at the Scottish government and criticise it, they also look at Westminster. I mean, remember, Jeremy, there's been 4 chancellors and 3 prime ministers this year. So the Scottish government may have its problems, but compared to the chaos at Westminster, they look like they're an organised unit. So people compare the two things, which is one reason why support for independence is so high, and one reason why people who say and run down Scotland, well, I'm afraid people in Scotland look at Westminster and say, we'll surely do better than that.
OK, final question, Alex. If you were there, briefly, what would your next move be?
My next move would be to have an independence convention and make that declaration. I would also introduce a bill in the Scottish Parliament for referendum that would be within competence to extend the Parliament's powers. That's one of the things I had up my sleeve back 10 years ago, why David Cameron was forced to concede the referendum that we did have. And I would encourage more mass demonstrations, because I think popular, peaceful demonstrations are a legitimate part of the political process. And incidentally, if we go to this de facto referendum and election, then for goodness sake, let the independence people stand as one ticket, Scotland United, one candidate each constituency. So it's unambiguously about independence, not about the track record of the SNP government.